Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. Today we're going to talk about antibiotics, and in particular, how not to screw yourself up when you're on them. When you're using antibiotics, it can take a long time for the gut microbiota to recover. Sometimes from 6 to 9 months, they can tell that there have been pretty dramatic changes in the gut flora. So today we're going to be covering both from a Western medical point of view and Chinese medical point of view, how to really maximize your time on antibiotics so that you can kill what needs to be killed while also maintaining that optimum gut flora. And yes, it goes far beyond taking a probiotic. As you'll discover, this really doesn't cut it when it comes to establishing a healthy gut microbiome. So Lan, from a pharmacological perspective, can you give us some idea about what we shouldn't be having when we're on antibiotics?
Of course, the first thing is alcohol. You cannot mix alcohol with antibiotics.
What about beer?
That's still alcohol, right?
It's a little bit of alcohol, but mostly it's like liquid bread.
It has alcohol. Because when you combine them, it makes the side effects worse, not only from the antibiotics, but also the alcohol. So you should be careful not only the beer, the wine, the vodka, but also some mouthwash. They might contain alcohol too. Or even some herbal formulas such as 藿香正气水. They are alcohol extract.
So even a tincture, like an alcohol tincture of a useful herb, you're saying not even to take that?
Yeah.
I think that's a little extreme. What about like a little bit of mouthwash and a beer?
I would still try to avoid that because sometimes it can cause really severe side effects.
Then what else shouldn't we be having? So we can't have alcohol, that's out. Can I at least enjoy some coffee?
No, caffeine is another thing that will interfere with the antibiotics. So some kinds of antibiotics will slow down the speed of how fast the body will break down the caffeine. In that way, it will increase the side effects of caffeine.
So you may feel more jittery or more nausea or something like this?
Exactly.
Okay. What about tea? I mean, if it's a natural tea, it's not going to be as harsh as coffee, right?
So there's another thing. Teas contain not only caffeine, but also we call it tannic acid.
Tannic acid?
Tannic acid, thank you. That will affect that will interfere with with antibiotics too.
Okay, so no alcohol, no coffee, no tea. At least I can have orange juice.
Orange juice is another thing that you shouldn't mix with.
See what I live with?
Antibiotics. Because juice like orange juice or grapefruit juice, they're acid. So they will reduce the absorption of antibiotics. In that way, it decreases effect.
Okay, so now we're up to no alcohol, no tea, no coffee, and no juice.
Right.
Anything else that's prohibited in a general sense while taking antibiotics?
Dairy.
Dairy, okay. So no milkshakes.
No milkshakes. So that's similar to juice. It will affect the absorption of antibiotics and decrease the effects of what the antibiotics are supposed to do.
Okay, great. Now, from a Chinese medical point of view, antibiotics are very cold. So what does that mean? When the gut microbiota are very active, they're prolific when there's a lot of metabolism, then it creates a condition of heat, just as the microbes in a compost pile may start to get so hot that they can catch fire, or you can have a barn where the hay gets wet and the bacterial activity gets so hot it can actually catch fire. So an aspect of our heat and our heat maintenance in the body has to do with our gut flora, which is why if you've ever just taken a dose of antibiotics that's pretty high dose, you're going to start to feel chilled. And this is part of the reason why you're feeling this chill is because of the effects on the gut microbiota, how that will interfere with gases in the body, that tend to convert convert fat into heat. So it's going to have an effect on this gut microbiota. And there's a thing called a gut-brain axis. So when you're taking the antibiotics, you may also feel a little bit different mentally. Interestingly, there have been associations where people are in kind of a depressed state and then they take antibiotics and then they go into a manic state for cases of bipolar disorder. So this gut-brain axis can really not be understated. Now, that's not to say, oh, if you take antibiotics, you're going to go manic. Not the case at all. And it's important to understand that people in China who themselves are very high-level Chinese medicine doctors, there's a time for antibiotics. And modern medicine rests on the foundation of antibiotics. If you want an extensive surgery to save your life, it rests on this foundation. So they're extremely important for medicine. We're not of the mind here at Botanical Biohacking to say that one thing is unnatural or anything like this. We're going to make the best use of plant-based medicines and the best use of modern medicines because we're not morons and we want to live a great life. Now, that's not to say that there aren't costs to these things. You take antibiotics, you just created a clear cutting of your microflora. So then what? Now, there's some conventional wisdom, I'll put that in quotes, that, okay, you've had antibiotics, then you need to take probiotics. This doesn't always do the trick. Now, there are certain cases where it works absolutely wonderfully. However, it really depends on that person's makeup, what's going on with the gut. And a good way to tell is to look at the tongue. So sometimes when people are on antibiotics, the tongue coating will become black. And this is a normal thing. Basically, it means the bacteria is dead. Now, what I've seen is people will take probiotics, and rather than get a healthy tongue coating back, it just gets thicker, but it's also kind of black. What's important to understand with probiotics is that it's kind of like taking a starter plant, like you have a potted plant. And just imagine taking a bunch of potted plants and you drop them off into Antarctica and you go, yay, I made a jungle. No, you didn't. You made a lot of dead plants. On the other hand, if you start to interact with the environment, so let's say that you could just go to Antarctica and turn up the heat. So you get the sun, changing the trajectory of, the way the Earth is rotating with the sun so that the sun is going just right over the Antarctica as though it's the equator. Pretty soon the environment's going to change drastically. All of those ice caps are going to melt, and pretty soon you're going to get a jungle environment simply by changing the temperature. So altering temperature and moisture in the gut is really a more reliable way of changing what's going on there. Now, how do you do this? How is it that you're just going to turn up the temperature or change the moisture, this kind of thing? Well, people will say, okay, have the probiotics, have the pickles, and have the yogurt, right? This is, if you look on a website, I've taken antibiotics, how do I restore my gut flora? This is the general advice. And this general advice is pathetically wrong. And here's why. Antibiotics are very cold on the gut, and yogurt is very cold and moistening. So what tends to happen is you get this kind of cold, marshy situation going on in the gut. People get water retention, kind of waterlogged, mental fog comes on. Now, if somebody's younger, they're an athlete, whatever, it's not going to matter that much. However, as people get older, if people are in weakened states, it really matters quite a bit. So what we suggest is, in a general sense, keep in mind this isn't medical advice because each person's unique, but in a general sense, when people in China will take antibiotics, they'll also maybe wait an hour and then take herbal formula like 火象蒸气 or 保和汤, and these formulas are digestive. So what they do is they help to warm the gut and restore that healthy microflora. Now, what if you don't have access to these? We can still use the concept. And one of the ways to use this concept is just to get ginger from your grocery store, slice it up, boil it, and drink that, particularly in the morning, to help restore that warmth in the gut. And it's something you can physically feel. It's not hard to conceptualize. Your stomach's nice and warm, you're kicking up the metabolic activity, the Ginger is going to affect the gastric juices as well. And this is really going to help to terraform the gut and restore it much faster. Now, what's another method that we use is to increase the number of fungi in the diet. This doesn't just mean eating a moldy sandwich. What I like to do if my gut flora is just pooched is get as many mushrooms, particularly wild mushrooms if I can get them, and boil them into a soup with lots of vegetables. So the more mushrooms, the more plant material there is, the more diverse your gut microbiota will become. Make sure as well, because plants and mushrooms are still going to be a little bit cold in nature, that you're adding some of these spices. So pick something awesome from your spice rack, add some chilies in there, warm it up a bit. And this is going to really help to restore your gut microbiota so that you're not getting nausea in the morning or mental fatigue or a mental fog. When I'm on antibiotics, I feel that my energy levels drop a little bit. I feel just a little bit more lethargic. So when I aim toward these warming foods, it tends to reverse this effect. Now, if you want a list of warming foods and what's cooling, there are a lot of websites that offer this as a general guideline. However, I believe most of these are kind of garbage. And the reason for that is because there's just so much context in daily life. So to keep it really simple, if you ballpark toward the flavors, which are pungent. What is pungent? Pungent means that you bite into it and it tends to go up. So you bite into some garlic, it goes right up the nose. Wasabi, same kind of thing. These are all going to be in the classification of pungent. Most of your spices on your spice rack are going to be pungent. And then you combine that with something that is bitter. Now, bitter is going to be found in mushrooms. It's going to be found in a lot of plant materials too. And as you cook it, it takes away some of that bitter flavor. But the bitter flavor tends to be associated, especially when it's mixed with pungent, with warming and drying the body. And antibiotics will have this kind of very cold nature. Because it's very cold, it can cause this water retention, kind of making us like a cold, swampy environment. I think of the movie from the 80s, The Never-Ending Story, and he's lost in the swamps of sadness. It's just swampy and cold and nasty. That's life on antibiotics. So warm the system, and then you can prevent some of those side effects from antibiotics like weight gain and some of the lethargy and nausea and this kind of thing. This is all very, very commonly done in China. People will often take herbs and antibiotics together, just keeping in mind that you want to take them about an hour apart so that they don't interact. A tea that I enjoy, now keep in mind before Lan said no tea with antibiotics. That is true, but she means take an hour break in between the two. So
At least an hour.
At least an hour, right. Very good point. If you're on an empty stomach, it might be a half hour to 45 minutes, but let's say that you're taking the antibiotics and you've just had a bunch of food with it. Then you may need to wait an hour and a half or something like this, right?
Yeah, an hour to 2 hours, like even more 2 hours probably gonna be ideal.
It's gonna be safer, especially with heavier American food. So this is gonna
Yeah.
be much faster in China where it's more plant-based, but if you're kind of on a meat and potato kick, then that's gonna be much slower absorption. So in that case, maybe even 3 hours. After this, I'll gear toward fermented teas, like fermented Tibetan tea or pu'er tea, or those are really my favorites, so I'll stick with those. And then, if it's around the time of the antibiotic, I might have a little more ginger tea just to warm up the system. Now, these fermented teas have been shown to really help restore healthy gut microbiota. So in this way, instead of having to wait many months before my gut microbiota can become restored and I can cultivate a healthy gut microbiome, it can theoretically happen much faster.
But definitely check with your doctor or pharmacist first, because some kinds of antibiotics are fine with caffeine, but some might cause some safety concerns. So you want to double check and make sure.
So remember, antibiotics are your friends and plant-based medicines are your friends. And if you use them both intelligently, you can drastically improve both the length and quality of your life. If you'd like to learn more about fibromyalgia, specifically how to really make a career out of this as an area of specialization, we have a continuing education course coming up for medical professionals. This will include Dr. Whalen, Thomas Whalen, MD, Cho Shui-lan, PhD, and yours truly. So we'll be coming at this from both a Western and Chinese medical point of view, as well as an herbal pharmacological point of view. We're going to cover not only the practical aspects of treating people, but also how to run a clinic, how to find people out there who are suffering with fibromyalgia, bring them into the clinic, and provide an education-based mode of care so that ultimately these people are getting not only care in your hands, but also a self-sufficient approach to long-term health care. And ultimately, that's the approach that really helps people in the long run. The Chinese Medicine That Works seminars are a blast. It really creates a wonderful community of supportive people. People who are practitioners are, signing up for classes on Chinese Medicine That Works and having really impressive results, not just clinically, but their practices are really blossoming in a way that is both ethical and efficient for patients and very lucrative for them. So our first seminar with them will be March 10th and 11th in San Antonio, Texas. We also have seminars coming up in Syracuse, New York. You can look for those on ChineseMedicineThatWorks.com. Thank you so much for listening. This is Botanical Biohacking. We're your hosts, Dr. Andrew Miles and Dr. Cho Shui-lan. Have a beautiful, glorious, and uplifting day.